I asked for 4 days, that's all 4 days to bury the man who raised me. I didn't ask for a month-long sabbatical, didn't threaten to walk out or make a spectacle. I simply stood in the glass box they called her office and said the words with more calm. Then I felt I need 4 days to bury my father, and Rena, my wife, see-if ridge and self-proclaimed visionary, didn't blink. She didn't lean forward, didn't ask how I was doing. She crossed her arms, let out a small deliberate sigh, tilted her head just enough to make it feel like I just proposed something foolish. You'll need to choose between work and your family, she said, her voice razor-sharp and sterile. There wasn't even a flicker of empathy in her tone. Just business, just numbers, just timing. I stood there like a man suddenly unplugged from something I couldn't name. Her words floated in the air, lingering, like the chill you feel when someone slams the door to a warm room behind them. I watched her lips stop moving, her arms remaining crossed like punctuation on a sentence she thought didn't need discussion. I waited for a second. Maybe she'd soften, maybe there was still a sliver of humanity left underneath all that strategic polish and shareholder poise, but she turned her eyes back to her screen, typing something like I hadn't just told her my father died yesterday. The Wilrist integrationist final negotiation, she added, her tone now clipped, more annoyed than Sternyar, the only one who knows the full system architecture. There it was, the trump card. She didn't say, I'm sorry. She didn't say, take the time you need. No, she framed it like I had leverage I shouldn't use, because to her, I wasn't grieving, I was being inconvenient. So I nodded, not because I agreed, not because I gave in. I nodded because that's what you do. When you realize the person across from you is no longer your partner, they're just a mirror of your sacrifices, reflecting nothing back. I didn't trust myself to speak. I didn't want to cry, not in front of her. That wasn't the kind of audience you shed real grief in front of. So I turned, kept me spine straight, and walked out of that office like I still had something to believe in. Every step back to my own office felt heavier than the last. Rich tech had floor-to-ceiling glass walls and minimalist furniture like bind inside a sleek modern fishbowl. Everyone could see everyone, no secrets. But that day, I felt like the only real person in the building. I closed my door, turned off lights, and just sat in my chair for a while. My father's voice echoed in my head, not loud, not commanding, just calm, like he always was when life kicked the breath out of me. Take a breath, Jared, then choose. He taught me that when I was a teenager and someone at school carved the word nerd into my locker. He said, you can't control other people's cruelty, but you can choose how to answer it. That voice, that memory, that man I was being told he didn't deserve 4 days. My hand hovered over the keyboard. Aimless, I stared at the lines of code on the screen, thousands of lines I'd written, improved, fixed in the dark while others slept. I thought about the hours I'd spent building Richnitz's back end because Rena insisted we couldn't afford a real team. I thought about the sleep I lost, the dinners I missed, the apologies I whispered to my father when I had to cancel a visit again and again because the company needs me, and now the company my wife couldn't spare me for 4 days. There was a numbness in my chest, like grief had hardened into something brittle and sharp. I pressed the heels of my palms against my eyes and waited for tears to come, but they didn't. Instead, I felt the quiet rush of clarity, the kind you get when someone draws a line so clearly in the sand. You finally know which side to stand on. I stood up and looked around my office, sterile, spotless, professional, the kind of place people looked at and assumed I had a everything title, lead systems architect, salary high 6 figures, respect, minimal control, none. I opened my drawer and pulled out the photo I kept hidden beneath my documents. It was the two of us, Dad and me, at my college graduation, was beaming, his hand on my shoulder like he was anchoring me to something solid. I had no mother, no siblings, just them. He didn't raise me to be spineless. He didn't sacrifice everything for me to be silenced. I ran my fingers over Thefram, then placed it upright on the desk for the first time in months, and in that moment I decided, not loudly, not rashly, but with the kind of still certainty that doesn't beg for approval. I turned my monitor off, logged out, and slipped the office keycard into my coat pocket. I walked out of the building without saying a word, past the junior engineer Schwo. Still thought I had power, past the HR manager who always looked away when I entered the break room, past their receptionist who chirped, have a good one, without even looking up. Outside, the sky had started to dim, the air was cooler than it looked, and the hum of the city sounded different. For the first time in years, I realized I was alone, not in the sense of being without people, but in the sense of being surrounded by the wrong ones, and I had 4 days not tourist, not to grieve, at least not the way Rena thought, but to remember the man who taught me how to fight, without fists, and to sharpen the silence in my chest into something useful. Because this story wasn't over, not by a long shot. The house was, too, quiet without him, even after all these years after I had moved to the city and become someone with a title and ancillary that people clap for at conferences. Dad's house still felt like the only place that understood me. The screen door creaked the same way it did when I was 12. The living room still smelled faintly of cedar and old books, and the coffee table, scratched and stained, still bore the mark of every science fair project, every math competition trophy. He helped me build my confidence, for this was where he cheered the loudest, where he poured every ounce of himself into raising me alone after cancer took. Mom, I didn't cry that night, not because I wasn't hurting, but because a something colder than grief had started to settle inside me. Not rage, not yet, just an unbearable weight of clarity. I sat down in Dad's old office chair, Theon, with the torn leather and the armrest that wobbled when you leaned too far. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as my laptop booted up. The blue glow of the login screen reflected off the dusty glass of the bookshelf beside me. Books and algorithms, data structures, quantum computing. Most were Dad's, annotated in his tight handwriting. Others were mine, gifts from him, passed along with pride and soft encouragement. You'll get it, J-Head. Always say you just need one more look. I used to believe that I just needed one more look, one more chance, one more conversation to explain myself. Booty was done explaining, done asking people like Rena to see me, done waiting for respect to be offered. It was time. I stopped offering myself to those who only took, so I opened the Wilrus Systems directory. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't cue up music or slam a drink beside me like I was in some tech revenge movie. I just exhaled, slowly cracked my knuckles, and started backing up every proprietary file tied to RidgeNet, the infrastructure I had built silently, line by line, year after year, with zero formal budget, zero thanks and zero acknowledgement. They didn't even know what it cost. The weekends, the holidays, the missed birthdays with Dad, when I was just one line of code away from solving it. And every time I'd call to say I couldn't make it, he'd just say, "I understand, son, you're building something big." God, he thought I was building something that mattered. But what I built, it mattered only as long as they could use it. The minute I asked for something human, time to bury the man, what out me everything, I became expendable. I wasn't going to cry about that anymore. I was going to answer it. I created a secure partition in my private cloud server, encrypted, multi-factor, gated, redundant backups, isolated logs, the kind of setup no one could stumble into, no matter how good the IT director thought she was. I transferred every script, every subsystem, every bridge protocol that connected Wilrus integration stack to our main rigid environment. The whole thing lived on my terms. Now they had a skeleton